Whew. All right, everyone. Tomorrow is a big day, and I'm feeling it because we have a chance to save 3,000 dogs, 3,000 living beings who've been trapped in cages their entire lives, may come out and see the sunlight for the first time, may be able to feel earth and grass, may have families who love them. And I'm feeling the pressure because while it's an incredible opportunity, it's an incredible challenge too. To give you some backdrop, there's a facility in Dane County, Wisconsin called Ridglan Farms, one of the largest beagle production and research facilities in the nation. And this is a facility that has sent dogs to some of the most horrific experiments in the history of vivisection, including force feeding dogs laundry detergent, sending dogs to be radiated, to be injected with chemicals and diseases like rabies. And the day-to-day confinement conditions are in many ways the worst thing about the entire company, because these dogs are raised in 2x4 metal cages, solitary metal cages, sometimes for years at a time, where they live on wire, they develop foot injuries, and they're subjected to surgical mutilations, cherry eye surgery, debarking surgeries by non-veterinarians who are not using anesthesia or painkillers. And tomorrow's the day where we're going to present all that evidence for the first time and try to convince a court in Dane County, Wisconsin, to file a criminal complaint against Ridglan Farms. And you might think, well, with all that evidence, why isn't this an open and shut case? And the answer is, from the day I stepped into Dane County, Wisconsin, 7 years ago in 2017, virtually all of the establishment political elites, the elected officials in Dane County, Wisconsin, have been against us. Not only have they not supported us in trying to enforce animal cruelty laws to protect the dogs at Ridglan Farms, they have actively tried to prosecute us. In March, earlier this year, I faced very serious criminal charges and potentially years in prison for documented conditions inside Ridglan and trying to give aid to 3 dogs. Those charges were dismissed, but to this day, the district attorney of Dane County, Wisconsin, and the other political leaders of Dane County, Wisconsin have not even been willing to have a conversation about the evidence we have of animal cruelty. And in this regard, they are not alone. Political elites across the nation, including the highest echelons of American power, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, don't take animal rights seriously, don't take the killing of dogs seriously. And I just posted a blog about this, but this is bizarre because if you look at the American political system, so polarized, so many debates, so little that we can agree on, if there's one thing that Americans can actually agree on, it's that we should stop killing dogs. So, for example, Democrats mocked the vice presidential candidate, Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, when it came out that she had shot a dog, just one dog, a dog by the name of Cricket, who killed her neighbor's chickens. She decided, I'm done with this dog, dragged the dog to her gravel pit. I have no idea why she dragged the dog to her gravel pit first. It's just a weird detail. Shoots this dog in the face. And everyone in the country, Democrats and Republicans alike, is mocking her. A lot of people are saying, and I agree with this, that she should have been criminally charged. And of course, a couple of weeks ago, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance were going off on Democrats for allowing Haitian immigrants to eat the pets, the dogs and cats of the residents of Springfield, Ohio. Now, that turned out to be a completely fabricated and false rumor. But this shows there's a kind of bizarre bipartisan consensus that we should not be killing dogs. What makes a bipartisan consensus about protecting dogs even more bizarre is that it is a complete illusion. The truth is that if you actually look at how the major political parties treat dogs for decades, they've both been quietly supporting the torture and murder of tens of thousands of dogs, just like Cricket, just like the pets in Springfield, Ohio. What I'm speaking about, of course, is the use of dogs in labs. Our government sends billions of taxpayer dollars to fund useless experiments in animals, including one particular facility called the Inhalation Toxicology Research Institute in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this particular facility, which is a facility run by the Department of Energy, federal government, among other things, they force beagle puppies to inhale plutonium gas, which cause multiple cancerous tumors throughout their body, including their own skeletons that basically deteriorate and melt away. All to reach a conclusion that radiation is bad, that we already knew. We already knew the radiation is bad. But this is really just the tip of the iceberg, because if you look at all the government funding to animal experiments across the nation, including funding for experiments performed on the dogs from Ridglan Farms, we're talking about every year tens of thousands of dogs, cumulatively over decades, hundreds of thousands of dogs. And many of these experiments and practices are indisputably illegal. And if you want to read more or hear more about that, check out the episode a couple episodes back on the torture of 60,000 dogs and how we're going to try and save 60,000 dogs. So we have this strange situation where seemingly everyone in America, and certainly everyone in political leadership, says, I love dogs, I protect dogs. And on the other hand, everyone in an elected position in America is sending a huge amount of money to support the torture of dogs. One of the weirdest things about all of this is recently the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, has been tweeting a lot about how Democrats want to eat your pets. And he fails to mention that he runs a company, Neuralink, that is itself torturing animals like monkeys and pigs and animals that could be companion animals in our homes. They are just as sensitive, just as social, just as feeling as the dogs and cats in our own homes. And yet Trump and Musk are both condemning Haitian immigrants for a false rumor about eating pets when they themselves are torturing animals in far more severe and egregious ways. But the Democrats aren't immune to this either. You have Kamala Harris mocking Kristi Noem for killing cricket, while she also recently praised Senator Dianne Feinstein, my former senator, recently deceased, and I hate to speak ill of the dead, but this is someone who is in bed with the farm industry, sent an enormous amount of money to the industries who put her in office, and even tried to put activists, including close friends of mine, in prison when she passed and co-sponsored the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. All to put peaceful activists in prison for trying to help dogs. So you might try to explain this hypocrisy, and certainly I've tried to, and you might look to corporate influence, corruption, and I think there are a lot of potential explanations, but that is actually not what I want to focus on in this particular episode. And I've written a lot about why corruption happens. You can go back to old blogs I've written, like The Cover Up at Smithfield Farms, Smithfield Foods, or the episode just a couple weeks back about how we can save 60,000 dogs. Check out that episode if you want to understand why these things happen. But in this episode, I want to talk about something that's even more important, namely, how do we get these politicians to stop funding the killing of dogs? And the most important thing I want to start with is that the prevailing theory as to how we stop these politicians, namely that we persuade them, is just simply wrong. As someone who has personally lobbied countless politicians for many years, and as someone who's very familiar with the psychological and political science literature on persuasion, I can tell you that persuasion, frankly, doesn't really work, or at least persuasion as we usually understand it. And what I mean by that is normally when we think of persuasion, we think the way we convince politicians to stop doing something or to start doing something is we give them arguments and facts. But it turns out that human beings, especially in groups, don't operate by arguments or facts. They don't rely on reason or evidence to make their decisions. Instead, they typically rely on social momentum and social norms. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look at someone like Kamala Harris this year just completely flip-flopped on fracking. It's kind of bizarre to me, and it's weird to me that there hasn't been more discussion about this. But back in 2019, 2020, when she was first running for president and when the climate movement was ascendant and everyone was feeling very strong on climate justice, Kamala was one of many people who literally chanted at protests. There's video footage of her chanting at protest against fracking. Yet this year, because she's trying to win Pennsylvania voters, and Pennsylvania is a state that has a lot of fracking, she suddenly just switched her position. And when people have asked her about this and said, hey, I thought you were down for climate justice and wanted to protect the planet from catastrophic climate change, she just repeats over and over again, well, my policies have changed, but my values are the same. My values are the same. What does that mean? What does that even mean? And how did your values support climate justice in 2019 and 2020 and support fracking in 2023. A little strange, right? But of course, Donald Trump is no better. When you look at Donald Trump, he appointed all these extremely conservative justices of the Supreme Court who overturned Roe versus Wade. And suddenly, this year in 2024, he makes a retreat on abortion and says, oh, actually, I don't want any federal action on abortion. My wife, in fact, is pro-choice. Melania Trump publishes his book and talks about how it's my body, my choice. And so this candidate who just a few years ago was a leader of the pro-life movement suddenly says he's kind of pro-choice. And in both of these cases, Kamala Harris on fracking, Donald Trump on abortion, it's not like they were given reasons or facts why they should change their mind. They moved with the political and social tides of the day. So reasons and facts are not the path to changing politicians. So another theory that a lot of people have is, well, if we can't persuade politicians, let's use power to change them. And if we can build political power, financial, demographic, voting power, no matter what these politicians' individual beliefs are, they will be forced to change. They'll be forced to, for example, ban experiments on dogs. Now, this gets closer to the truth, right? It gets closer to the truth because politicians act pursuant to their incentives and act pursuant to the social and political climate they live in, not because they individually are persuaded. And a politician who ignores political power, financial power, demographic power is not going to be in office for very long. But here's the problem with the power-based strategy. One of the odd things about building power as a strategy for change is that typically when you seek power, you compromise your ability to create change. So Kamala Harris is a great example of this. One of the reasons Kamala Harris has almost certainly flip-flopped on fracking is because she wants to win. She wants power. And she knows she can't win. She can't obtain political power unless she promises to support fracking. Now, if you're concerned about change, unfortunately, that pathway to seeking power is going to compromise your ability to seek change, right? And this is not just a one-time example. Damon Centola, a social network theorist at the University of Pennsylvania who's done some of the most important experiments on how to make big things happen. His book is literally called Change, How to Make Big Things Happen. He talks about how accumulating power, at least establishment mainstream power, is often counterproductive for exactly this reason, because when you are in a position of power, there are all these countervailing forces that entrench you in the position you're in. And a while back, I blogged, actually while I was in jail, I blogged about how the average inmate in a jail cell can be more influential than Oprah. Just Google that on my Substack. You'll see the post. Maybe I should make a video at some point. But it talks about Damon Centola's research and how change typically happens at the periphery, not at the core. And what that means is at the center of power, if you're the most influential and most connected person, the most powerful person, typically you actually can't create change because it's almost like there's this spider web of attachments, these weights hanging you down that prevent you from moving in a more transformative direction. Okay, well, persuasion and power don't work, then what does? Well, it turns out persuasion of a sort does matter, and power of a sort does matter. But the sort of persuasion and power that matter are persuasion and power based on networks of ordinary people. In other words, social movements. So when you have a social movement, a network of people mobilized behind change, the evidence is that you can persuade people far more effectively than reasons and facts, or even just outright political power. And if your goal is to create power, to push for those who are establishment leaders in the system to create change, the only way to create power that allows you to actually push for change, as opposed to entrenching you within the system, is power based on networks of ordinary people. And the most prominent proponent, and among the most renowned social scientists of our age, is a social scientist and former physicist at the University of Pennsylvania named Duncan Watts, who wrote, I think, literally the most cited paper in the history of sociology. It's called A Model of Small World Networks. It's in Nature. And I did a podcast with Duncan Watts a while back. There's no YouTube show of this, but you can listen to the podcast if you want to cringe a little bit about how much I'm fanboying. It's completely embarrassing podcast right from the start. When I don't listen to many of my podcasts, typically just to do a quick audio check. That podcast, I could not tolerate listening to more than 5 or 10 seconds because I am so cringy. It's like the worst fanboying you've ever seen in your life. In fact, I'm embarrassed I even mentioned this podcast. So hopefully, let's just forget that I mentioned that I did a podcast though, and let's just talk about Duncan Watts' actual work. So Duncan Watts is a social scientist, computational sociologist, and former physicist who penned this paper in Nature that is, I think, one of the two, or possibly the most cited paper in the history of sociology, and one of the most cited papers. It might be the single most cited paper in the history of social science. What he did is he took enormous amounts of data across many different networks and found the secret to how huge networks can change with relatively small interventions. And what he explains about small world networks where no matter how big the network gets, the network still remains connected by a small number of connections. In other words, have you ever heard of the concept of, is it 6 degrees or 7 degrees of 7 bacon? I think it's 6 degrees of 7 bacon. So there's this concept of 6 degrees of 7 bacon, which the idea behind it is everyone on the planet Earth is connected to everyone else within 6 degrees. And that's what Duncan Watts showed. And it shows that no matter how big the population of the planet Earth is, we're always connected within 6 jumps, which is kind of amazing. That also means we have incredible power to change the entire network, because any human being on the planet Earth within 6 jumps can affect every human being on the planet Earth if we can form the right critical mass, if we can form the right critical energy that can spread influence through the entire network. And the metaphor that Duncan Watts uses in describing empirically and scientifically how this mechanism happens is a forest fire. So let me explain this for a moment. So you've got a dry leaf, just one leaf in a forest. That dry leaf can't start a fire. Even if it's the driest and most flammable leaf on the planet Earth, if you've got a dry leaf sitting by itself in a forest and it hits a spark and it starts burning, it's going to burn and burn out. Why? Because one leaf is not enough. You need a cluster of dry leaves and other foliage, dry foliage, underbrush, right? And enough dry leaves cluster in the right spot, frankly, any spark is sufficient to transform the entire system, because if you have the right pre-existing conditions and you hit that cluster of kindling and leaves with a spark, it has a critical mass of energy, a critical point of energy that will transform the entire system. So what does this have to do with social change and saving dogs from experiments? Well, Duncan Watts has looked at networks of people and how they change, and he says that they're shockingly similar to a forest fire in the following sense. The ordinary people in a network, every single human being in a social network, is kind of like a dry leaf in Watts's metaphor. And if enough of these dry leaves, enough people cluster in the same space in a network and take action together, they can create a social fire, a mass movement that changes everything it touches, in the same way that a forest fire, once it hits a critical threshold, becomes so hot and so powerful that it just spreads and transforms the entire ecosystem. A social fire, a social movement that reaches that critical mass, can transform the political landscape of an entire issue. And that is exactly what's happened with the civil rights movement, with the gay rights movement, with the women's rights movement over the last 100 years. But it's not any network that can create this sort of change. There are certain conditions that are important. The first condition is a network must be densely connected, right? If you have a ton of dry leaves in a forest, but there's one leaf here, another leaf there, another leaf across the forest, even if all the leaves individually have high potential energy, they can't come together and build enough power, enough energy to change the entire forest. So the same is true of a social network. If all of us are alone, even if we're great, passionate, devoted activists, if we go it alone, or if we're divided between too many different campaigns, we can't combine forces and create that critical energy that's required, that threshold that's required to transform the entire system. Another attribute of networks is that they must be unified, right? If one leaf is burning really hot and the next one is really cold, say you have a frozen leaf and then a burning hot leaf, even if the leaves are connected, the fact that one leaf is going in one direction, the other leaf is going the other direction, will stall the network from spreading the fire. And this is what happens with social movements as well. When activists are not unified, when they're not working together, and even worse, when they're working against each other, that stops the energy from spreading from one person to the next. And if you haven't listened to my last conversation, Vegan Gains, I called that dude out. I called Richard Burgess out. First time I called anyone out on social media. I'm just kidding. I didn't call him out. I like Richard a lot. He's a really smart guy. But I did challenge him on some of the posts he's made recently condemning other vegans because they don't have the right position on Gaza. Go check out that episode if you're interested. So, but we can't let that happen. The network has to be unified for it to be powerful. But finally, the network also has to be robust, meaning that whether it's a forest fire or a social fire, there will be forces within the ecosystem or the political system that try to put the fire out. And if a slight breeze can put the blaze out, the fire, even if it's in theory quite powerful, and even if there's a lot of kindling, it just won't burn. So it has to have protective mechanisms, resilience mechanisms that allow the fire to survive a slight breeze. And so when you apply this metaphor to social movements, the idea is that we have to be able to respond effectively to backlash. When there are efforts to repress and stop the movement from doing the work it does, weak movements just die. Weak movements fall apart. They start engaging in infighting, people get scared, and they fall apart. But robust movements, movements that even if they're initially small, have strategies for not just overcoming the backlash, but harnessing the backlash for change, those are the movements that succeed. And it's similar to how a weak blaze, wind will actually just blow it out, right? If you got a weak blaze that doesn't have much robustness, the kindling is not positioned in a way, there isn't kind of the ecosystem and physical and chemical structure of the kindling to ensure it can survive a light breeze, that fire is just going to go out. In contrast, a robust fire, even if it's initially small, if it's a very robust fire, wind actually helps it spread. The wind will actually spread the flames from one place to the next. And that's the same with social movements. The wind that's trying to put us out, the repression of activists, can actually help us spread the movement even more broadly. So let's go back to that original question now. How do we convince politicians to stop the mass killing of dogs? Well, we have the answer now. The answer is a network of ordinary people that is connected, unified, and robust. Now, the problem is that's much harder than it seems. And especially in today's world, we live in a world where people aren't connected, they're lonely, right? People are spending more and more time alone. More people are playing video games, sitting on social media. A lot of you are watching this YouTube video instead of hanging out with me. What's wrong with you? Come hang out because we need to hang out in real life. But so many people are disconnected from everyone else. That's not effective. Second, people, far from being unified, are distracted and in conflict. They're not focused on common objective. They're actively fighting with each other on Facebook or Twitter, or they're just distracted in a way that prevents them from coming together to fight for change. And then finally, people are afraid. Instead of being brave and robust in the face of repression, everyone's scared. And if people are scared, they go home. So this combination of factors, the loneliness, the distraction and lack of focus, and the fear we're seeing rising to record levels in human society, these are incredibly powerful restraining forces of social change. And they're the forces that are really preventing us from convincing people like Trump and Harris to stop killing dogs. But the key point here is that the restraining forces aren't permanent. In fact, the existence of these restraining forces in some ways presents an opportunity. There are tried and true ways to overcome these restraining forces. I'm not going to talk about them right now, but I've blogged about this quite a bit. There's a blog I wrote a while back called How to Find Community in a Disconnected World. You should go check out if you have questions about that. But in the meantime, I think all of us can contribute in small ways to ensure the networks we are a part of are connected, unified, and robust. So you should ask yourself, when you advocate for animals or for any cause, are you doing it alone or are you connecting with others? Are you promoting unity within your cause? Are you engaging in online fights? I mean you. I mean you. I mean literally you. You are the one who's engaging in online fights. And for the record, I mean me too. I've done this sometimes. Maybe even my recent conversation with Richard wasn't the best example of trying to have constructive disagreement. And I'm sure there's some things I said that I'd probably take back. But I always try to be supportive and generative in this movement instead of trying to bring other people down. And then finally, are we helping to build movement resilience in the face of challenges? Or are we running away in the face of repression and backlash? Ask yourself, what are you doing? I'm not saying everyone has to take the same role in building resilience, unity, or connection, but all of us should be playing some role. So my final note is next few days are going to be an opportunity for all of us to practice those movement muscles, because tomorrow, after years of prosecution, years of the government elites ignoring us, we will have a chance to turn the tables and save 3,000 dogs. And this is so important. I cannot say how important this is, because every one of these dogs, just yesterday, I was spending time with Anna, one of the beautiful beagles we rescued from Ridglan. And the idea that this beautiful creature who has so much love for her family, who loves sniffing and exploring the world and loves delicious foods. I was giving her orange chicken from a vegan restaurant yesterday. It was vegan orange chicken. Duh, it's from a vegan restaurant. These beautiful, amazing experiences that she wanted to have, the safety and just lack of pain that every sentient being deserves in their lives. When we rescued her, she had swollen red feet, had never stepped out of a cage, and was suffering from psychological traumas all the beagles at Ridglan Farms are suffering from, because she had never seen the sun, stepped outside, or even felt someone's love. And there are 3,000 dogs exactly like Anna who could be saved if we win tomorrow. But we need your help, because we need a movement, not just a lawyer, a movement that is connected, that is unified, that is robust. And one way you can do that is just making a social media post asking Tony Evers, the governor of Wisconsin, to support us in protecting Ridglan dogs. So that's all I've got to say. This podcast actually went longer than I expected, even though it's only 26 minutes. But I hope you subscribe, and I'm sure I'll follow up with all of you about what happens tomorrow. And I hope you share this with other people, because no matter what happens tomorrow, the judge has incredible discretion. The governor has incredible discretion to potentially rescue the Ridglan dogs, enforce animal cruelty laws to save 3,000 dogs. We can save all of them, every single one of them, transform their lives, and set off a chain reaction that may end the use of dogs in research and may end all animal experiments across the nation and globe. But to do that, we need you to be part of this movement. We need you to see the power that you have to convince the most powerful people in this country, including not just Ismail Zahn, the DA in Dane County, Wisconsin, but Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. You and I together can convince these powerful people that these dogs deserve to be saved. So let's go do it. Thanks, everybody. We don't have to hurt animals. You can protect them. We don't have to kill them. We can care for them. And that's who we're meant to be, right? That's who we are when we're at our best. We're caring for each other and for the other living beings of this earth and not hurting them.